about. WLBB, Carrollton, News Talk 1330, FM 106.3.
Good morning. Welcome to the Community Voice. I'm Steve Gredick, your host. Delighted to have you with us. Yes, it's Tuesday. You got me 2 days in a row. I know that's not good news, but 2020 hasn't been known for its good news. Anyway, it's going to be a beautiful day. We're honored to have in studio Tyler Paul Smith. Good morning, sir.
Good morning. How are you?
Good, good. Last time you were here was January 24th. You're a candidate for a state representative, House District 18. And a lot's happened since January 24th.
Indeed, it has. We went from announcing our run to now we've qualified, we have passed the primary, and now we are in the runoff. So a lot of exciting things have happened.
Well, I was thinking more in terms of society at large. Let me get that microphone a little bit closer to you. There you go. And with that in mind, before we kind of jump into your experience and get more deeply into the race, obviously the pandemic has changed everybody's lives, everybody's business, everybody's, going to church. It's just changed everything. How do you think Governor Kemp's done with this situation?
I think with the situation he has been facing, he has done what he thought was best, and I don't know that I've really disagreed with anything the governor has done so far. I think he has been very reluctant to implement certain measures, whereas Mayor Bottoms and other Democrats across the state have just been so quick to try to really trounce on every liberty that we have. I think that is something that we all need to pay close attention to, is how quickly even some of the local officials may be to try to attack our liberties and limit them, all in the name of trying to combat the pandemic. I think our people are very smart and educated. I think that they know the necessity of a mask, but requiring a mask, that's a whole different situation. We shouldn't be usurping the legislative authority at the executive level, and I appreciate Governor Kemp not doing that.
Well, let's jump into your race for the 18th House District. You're running because Kevin Cook chose not to run, I think, about after 10 years. Prior to him, we had a little tenure with Bill Heath, and prior to that, Thomas B. Murphy was the representative for the 18th, longest-serving House Speaker in the history of America at the time, and I imagine that probably still remains. Tell us a little something about your background. You're an attorney, and I've got to insert it, so forgive me. The nephew of Harold Shedd, who was a guest last week, who's just a good friend and a wonderful, iconic kind of radio music industry legend. So tell us a little something about your experience and what brought you to this point.
So I grew up in Haralson County on a small farm that's been in my father's family for 170 years. Instead of jumping into swim pools in the summertime, we were in the hayfield cutting hay to feed our cattle during the winter. And so I graduated from Bremen High School, went on to the Citadel, completed my undergrad studies in 4 years, and then I went on to law school over at Atlanta's John Marshall Law School, and I've been practicing out of Villa Rica for over a year now. And really, the whole reason I wanted to come back is to give back to my community, not only through practicing law, but to hopefully one day represent them in the State House of Representatives, because it's a lot of people invested their time in me and my family as well. And so for me to give back, this is the prime of my life. People would ask me, why would I pick this time of my life to do this? Why not wait? And I thought, well, I can give the best years of my life to my community. I'm still sharp. I've still got plenty of energy. I can devote my time and energy to my community.
What drew you to the Citadel? That's not your typical, UGA, Georgia Southern, Roll Tide type of, path for a lot of young people?
Well, I was looking for something very different. I wanted a challenge. I wanted to challenge myself, and I thought that if I were to go to college, a little ways away from home, it's 6 hours to Charleston, as far as the drive there, and I really wanted to challenge myself. I wanted to see just how much I could put on myself and handle the stress that is associated with attending the Citadel. Although I will submit to you, the first year was the easiest year. You had plenty of people telling you what to do every minute of the day. You didn't have to think about anything. Senior year, you had to think about everything you were going to do that day.
Did you like that discipline?
I did. I really did. The discipline, and I wish that more college students would be able to have that kind of discipline. It really helps you, and it's helped me after graduating the Citadel. It's something you take with you, and that discipline being instilled in you. I'm very thankful for that opportunity. I've went and graduated from the Citadel.
Well, there's so much we want to get into, so let's just kind of get started. You talked about giving back, being part of the community, and this being a long-term goal. Before we go, let me mention any further. Let me mention that we're on Facebook Live, News Talk 1330, so if anybody has any questions or comments, you can post them there, and we'll take a look at them during the break. So why run?
Well, this seat, and I had actually worked as a legislative aide for Representative Cook and several other representatives in the House, so I saw what our district was facing. And with an open seat, I mean, it's kind of open season for everyone, and I thought, I can bring some experience to the table. I've been involved in the process. I worked for 3 years as a legislative aide. Several of my legislators that I worked for, we've carried anywhere from 2 to 5 bills every session. And getting the legislation passed, it's not just trying to get a bill passed out of one chamber. You have to then go from the House to the Senate. You have to have those relationships not only in the State House of Representatives, but in the State Senate as well, because navigating those waters becomes mighty tricky. It's almost like a tugboat navigating the Mississippi River with one of the barges. You have to know where every rock, wherever sandbar is, and know what to look out for, know the dangers that are hidden in the shadows as well.
Well, let me ask you this question. We hear often, we have for many years now, about working across the aisle, reaching across the aisle. What's your opinion of that in light of the fact there are just some legislators that you cannot work with?
Well, that is very true. I would count a couple of the Democrats over in the State House now as friends. Had a good, healthy discussion with Bob Trammell, the minority leader. He and I do not agree on anything. However, we talked about redlining and the issues with historically African-American communities, especially in the metro areas, and then even in southwest Georgia as well, and how we could try to prohibit the redlining that we have seen going on here within the last decade. So there are some issues that we can find common ground on. However, the end-all conclusion or solution to those problems, we see a little bit differently on that. But
with your time over there, did you kind of notice, and I was over there for a couple of years doing different type work, but I kind of noticed it's like some of the people who are elected to office, you kind of wonder how they got elected.
You really do. You think, well, if so-and-so can get elected, then surely I could. But, I have great competition in this race, and I'm thankful for the good, clean race we've had so far. But you really do wonder, it's like, well, how did a voter think that this person was qualified? But, the voters make the decision at the end of the day, and we'll abide by that every time.
Well, let me ask you that. That's a good segue. And I'll let you elaborate, but, having interviewed a couple of dozen state reps over the years, a lot of times they say, well, I'm going to vote the will of the people. But it makes me wonder, like, well, isn't there more to it than just that? And how do you determine the will of the people on certain issues? Or aren't you elected so that we can live our lives in quietness and peace and tranquility while you deal with the legislative issues? And aren't there other criteria like constitutionality, affordability, et cetera?
Yes, so it's a juggling act. There's a classical study on whether legislators should be the trustee or the delegatee as far as how they vote over in the state house or any legislative assembly. For me, first and foremost, what I'm looking at when I look at legislation, I have a Christian worldview. That is first and foremost what I'm going to evaluate legislation through. I'm a conservative as well, so I look at a piece of legislation. If we have lived for over 200 years without this legislation, is it possible for us to go on living without this bill? Do we just have to have this legislation? Mm-hmm. Now, I know we have to legislate certain issues, and I won't back down from it. I really enjoy the policy side of it. That was the greatest thing about working as a legislative aide, is actually being involved in the policy process. But, can we live without this? More government is not the answer. It has never been the answer. Can we do with less? Can we get by with less? That is really the way I'm going to approach this. Progressive legislation just seems to creep in every session, so we have to have someone on the watch wall protecting against that. We have to defend against the liberal onslaught that comes every year.
Our guest this morning is Tyler Paul Smith. He's a candidate for the 18th State House seat, which includes Southern Haralson and Northern Carroll. And we're going to be back with more. Please post your question or comments to the News Talk 1330 Facebook page, and we'll be back with more after this.
A well-rounded education includes much more than just academics. At Oak Mountain Academy, we encourage our students to find their niche in any of our 42 co-curricular opportunities. Over the past 5 years, we have brought home 5 state and 20 regional athletic titles. Our one-act play and literary teams continuously compete at the region and state level, and our academic teams bring home first place more than not. We are warriors creating legacies. To learn more, visit oakmountain.us.
For more than 70 years, you have turned to Tanner Health System for your healthcare needs. As our community moves forward, Tanner is here for you. Strong, safe, and close to home. Routine medical appointments, urgent elective surgeries, and imaging are back on the calendar at our hospitals and Tanner Medical Group practices. With the safety of our patients, staff, and community always our top priority. Learn more at tanner.org. Hashtag We Are Tanner Strong. That's tanner.org. Hashtag We Are Tanner Strong.
Good morning. Welcome back to the Community Voice. We've got some nice input online. We even have some former radio personalities involved, so it's just really cool. Brian Payne says, many of us in the Bremen area have watched this young man from an early age. He will make an outstanding representative. Team Tyler. So you got a Team Tyler going on?
Well, I appreciate that, Brian. And yes, I'm always humbled day in and day out at the support that I've received from folks all over the district. It's truly an honor just to have this opportunity to run for this seat.
The free enterprise system. Are you a capitalist?
Oh, absolutely. I have a T-shirt that I picked up years ago that instead of it's in the shape of the Coca-Cola logo, and it says "Enjoy Capitalism." And in this time of a socialist movement we see, it's more important than ever to actually articulate our ideals of capitalism.
Okay, well, let's do that. What is it about capitalism that attracts you?
Well, one thing, and I would submit this to the other side of the aisle as well, capitalism has brought more individuals out of poverty than any government program that has ever been devised by man.
I think in the last 100 years, it's over 1 billion people have been risen out of poverty as a result. It's the only system that really creates wealth.
Right.
Government does not.
That's exactly right. People say we created jobs. You see a lot of legislators, a lot of executives saying we create jobs. The government has never been in the business of creating jobs unless it was in the bureaucracy just to drain the taxpayer. So it is the small business leaders in our community that create the jobs.
And it's that taxation and the regulation that often hampers creativity in the workplace.
Right.
Okay, let's move to constitutional protections. one that's getting a lot of attention at this period of time. You would think with coronavirus be enough to keep our attention for 2020, but we have other issues now.
Right.
And so the Second Amendment now moves it back into the forefront as more and more people are buying weapons for self-protection. Tell us about your opinion of the Second Amendment.
So, actually, I'm for constitutional carry. I don't think that we should be limiting the Second Amendment. I think it's self-explanatory. Now, that being said, one key thing that I learned while legislative aid to 4 different state representatives was that we eat the elephant one bite at a time. This year, we would introduce several gun bills every session, and we would make progress each session. Even though we were trying for the home run, we knew that if we could hit a single and a double and get an RBI, we were in the game, and we would win it eventually. So one thing that I've articulated in my campaign so far is that as the next state legislator for District 18, I'm going to introduce legislation to cut the cost of concealed carry permits in half. You look at the history of the concealed carry permit, that was a progressive ploy to try to limit the Second Amendment right. A lot of people have forgotten that. We just think, well, I'll go get my carry permit and there's not a big deal to it. But, 100 years ago, this was not always a set in stone rule. To see these progressive encroachments, you really have to know history. You have to research this and know what their tactics have been over the years.
Income tax, when it started, it was 1%.
Right.
So progressivism that's another good example. Let me switch gears. I'm going to jump around a bit.
Sure.
So stay with me. Georgia is changing.
It is.
And large part of that is because of Metro Atlanta.
Right.
Georgia now has a population of like 3 million.
Right.
But 6 million plus are in Atlanta. So we have a rural-urban divide, if you will, and tell us about your perspective on that. And here we are in West Georgia, and Metro Atlanta is coming this way. I grew up in Atlanta, went to college in Atlanta, so I think I can speak about it. But does it concern you and if so, for what reasons?
It really does concern me. So I come from a rural background myself. Most of the individuals in my family have always been involved with farming. And so the committee that is number one on my list to make sure that I'm a part of is the Agriculture Committee. We have so many agricultural interests here that need to be protected with urban sprawl. I think we've even seen that divide here in West Georgia already between the urban and the rural. And I want to make sure that our farmers, and when I say farmers, that includes our vineyards, our meat processing plants. I know that we have I think 3 or 4 now, and I know there's one in the works in rural Carroll County. So I want to represent those interests, and to do that, we have to stand on the watch wall, like I said earlier, and we have to protect against this urban sprawl. I've got people that were fighting against chicken houses up in Haralson County, and no one really hears about those fights. It's like, well, Haralson County, if you want a chicken house in Haralson County, you can go put one up. But no, there's always a fight. So making sure that we protect our agricultural interests, that is one of my number one priorities.
Well, we're unique in that you can drive 20 minutes, you're out there with the horses, cows, and chickens.
Right.
And then in 20 minutes, you're in downtown Bremen or downtown Carrollton, Villa Rica. So it's a unique blend.
It is.
And when Paulding and Douglas steps over the line, that blend will probably go away.
I would think so. And, making sure that we have the right legislation in place to protect our agricultural bent. I'm not trying to stand in the way of any kind of industrial progress, but when it encroaches upon our traditional agricultural lifestyle out here, that is when I really have an issue with it.
Kind of staying on that, obviously a topic for the nation now when we look at Seattle and New York and Detroit, and even more so now Atlanta is law and order.
Right.
And as we see Metro Atlanta coming out, does that concern you also about any crime coming out this way?
It does. There was always a discussion about MARTA expansion while I was an aide over there in the State House, and everyone thinks, well, if we bring high-speed rail out here, we can cut down on fuel consumption and stop pollution. But what a lot of people don't realize is how much crime and how many criminals will be riding that MARTA train out here. I mean, they'll be marketing their drugs, and Lord knows what else out here if they ride that line all the way out here. So it sounds good in a perfect world, but as we know, we don't live in utopia.
More than half of the state budget goes to education, both secondary and post-secondary, Board of Regents, etc. Are we getting our money's worth?
Well, we would get our money's worth if we didn't have all the standardized testing. I think you've seen a great move by legislators here in the last decade to try to get rid of Common Core, and that's one thing that I've pledged already, is to do away with Common Core and look at how we can actually free the teachers up to not have to teach to a test. They can actually teach our students so they learn, so they retain this, not just to regurgitate on one day on which a test is given to them.
Okay. We're going to take a break. Just this little point of information for our good friend James Camp. Georgia started requiring pistol toters licenses in 1910. It wasn't for public safety, but it was, according to James, it was to disarm minorities. So very interesting, a little bit of history there. Okay, if you got any questions, comments, please post them to the Facebook page, News Talk 1330. We'll be back with more with Tyler Paul Smith after this word.
For more than 70 years, you have turned to Tanner Health System for your healthcare needs. As our community moves forward, Tanner is here for you. Strong, safe, and close to home. Routine medical appointments, urgent elective surgeries, and imaging are back on the calendar at our hospitals and Tanner Medical Group practices. With the safety of our patients, staff, and community always our top priority. Learn more at tanner.org. Hashtag We Are Tanner Strong. That's tanner.org. Hashtag We Are Tanner Strong.
As a graduate of Oak Mountain Academy, I've found that my experience on the mountain prepared me beyond all expectations. As a junior at Auburn University, I approached my studies with great confidence thanks to what I learned at OMA. When I think back on my time on the mountain, I think of my teachers. Their genuine love and concern for me as a student was always evident, and now, as an adult, I still foster those relationships. I'm Carly Robinson, an Oak Mountain Academy alum. Visit oakmountain.us to see how you can offer your child an amazing opportunity to be a warrior.
Good morning. Welcome back to the Community Voice. We're really excited here because we just found out that Stephen Garner is watching and Scotty Long is watching. You can't do any better than that, can you?
You really can't.
We were talking about education before the break. One issue that's going to be with us through the presidential election is school choice. Where do you come down on that?
I'm all for school choice. My parents made that choice to educate my brother and I at a different school than what we were necessarily supposed to be educated at. So I don't think that the government, again, should be dictating where we educate our children. So I will fully support school choice as the next state legislator.
One issue that's gaining more and more interest in Haralson County is that of a landfill. We have a question here from Jamar Williams. Talk about the dump, please, going into Haralson County.
So I'm totally against the landfill coming into Haralson County. I haven't missed very many meetings across the county, and I even spoke at the Tallapoosa City Council meeting last week in a stump speech outlining why I was opposed to it. And as a state house rep, there is a little bit I can do on that side as well, even though the majority of this decision will be left up to our local elected officials. But as the state house member for this area, I intend on passing legislation that will make coal ash ponds illegal in the state of Georgia. So that ought to help nip some of this in the bud over with the landfill situation in Haralson County.
Probably one of the most important, one of the most divisive issues since 1973 has been that of life. Understand that you come down on the side of life with a pro-life position.
I do indeed. So a Christian worldview that I operate from, every individual is created in the image of God. And they try to dress it up in some kind of nice form so it doesn't sound as bad as what it really is. But the murder of the unborn must stop. And even as having the endorsement of Georgia Right to Life, that was a pretty intense interview process with them, and we went over more than just abortion. It also comes into the situation of euthanasia, physician-assisted suicide. This is something we have to really stand hard against. When we start trying to play God, that really gets into some shady territory. So I'm 100% pro-life and will always defend our pro-life values.
So from conception to natural death.
From conception to natural death.
I think there's some states on the West Coast that make moves toward assisted euthanasia.
They have.
And I'm sure that that's on the horizon for Georgia.
It looks as if it is. Everyone thinks this would never happen in the state of Georgia, but if we don't stay vigilant in our fight against these encroachments, then we could very well see it in our lifetimes. And that is one thing that I'll fight for. The Tyler Paul Smith that you send to the State House here on August the 11th will be the Tyler Paul Smith one day that will either be voted out or, retire, whatever the case may be, whenever the time comes. I'll be the same as when I go in as when I come out.
Let's shift back a little bit to political. Tell us, you've got a few endorsements. What are they?
So I was very lucky to receive the endorsement of the local sheriff in Haralson County, Eddie Mixon. He's been a close personal friend for a very long time, but Sheriff Mixon and I both get that our community needs protecting. Even as a defense attorney, I realize that where I lay my head, I have to think about the safety of my community as well. So anything I can do to help law enforcement, which also includes fully funding our law enforcement officials, I'll fight against any effort to defund our law enforcement officers. They need the full funding that they need to get the job done and keep us all safe. Also, I was lucky to receive the endorsement of Jack Browning, our district attorney in the Tallapoosa Judicial Circuit. I had the pleasure of working with him during law school and seeing the prosecutorial side. I have a great appreciation for it, and Jack has really been a help to me in my practice of law as well. Former mayor and state senator Wayne Garner, I was very humbled to have his support and his endorsement. I've known Mayor Garner for a long time and count him as a close personal friend.
There's a couple of questions on the Facebook page that I'd love to get to, but we're just simply not going to have time to do so. And we're kind of winding it down. Campaign trail, one question before we go into the wrap-up. What's kind of the major issues that you're hearing in Carroll and Haralson County?
So I think it still comes down to less government. We've seen an increase in government participation in all of our lives, unfortunately. I mean, liberties were assaulted overnight with a stroke of a pen. I think people are very attenuated to the issue of local politicians that, they may talk the conservative talk, but they don't walk the conservative walk. So I think that is an issue that people have first and forefront in their minds right now, and that is something that, as the next state house rep, I'll always fight for conservative values.
Okay, you come to my door, knock, knock, knock. I'm half asleep. I wake up. I stumble to the door. I haven't shaved. I look, it's just gross. The whole thing's terrible. And I open the door, and you say, you're Tyler Paul Smith. You're running for state rep. And I say, well, why should I vote for you?
Well, Steve, just to let you know, I've been a conservative all my life. I've actually had experience over in the state house, and I think with this new decade that we find ourselves in, experience will matter more than now than ever. We have redistricting coming up to make sure that our interests are adequately represented by a local person. I mean, my family's been in West Georgia area for almost 200 years now. So to say that we're invested in the community, I'll always be invested in my community, and I can give back to my community. I know the process. I have a little bit of an advantage being an attorney because I can see what the consequences may be before we even pass a piece of legislation. Just knowing how laws will affect this code section or that code section, I can bring that experience to the table, as well as for our agricultural interests being raised on a small family farm. I get it. and will continue to represent our community in the best way possible.
Okay, what's your website?
It is smithforhouse.com, and you can find us on Facebook at Vote Tyler Paul Smith.
All right, well, our gratitude this morning to Tyler Paul Smith, candidate for the 18th House District for the great state of Georgia. Early voting has started, correct?
It has, correct.
And election runoff day is August the 11th. And we encourage everyone to, first and foremost, to get educated on the candidates and then vote.
Please do.
All right, well, thanks to our sponsor this morning, Oak Mountain Academy and Tanner Health System. Go out and make it a great day. You're in tune to WLBB.